Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Terri Cole Show. If you don't know me, my name is Terri Cole, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist, a relationship expert, and the founder of Boundary Bootcamp and Real Love Revolution. So, I want to say, first of all, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I always love spending time with you and your inquisitive minds. So what we're going to be handling on today's episode, it's called Change Your Lens, Change Your Life. And I'm giving you 4 powerful steps that you can take to basically reframe your perspective. Why do we want to reframe our perspective? Because a lot of times, the way that we're looking at things are not beneficial to the things that we want to create in our lives. And you really do have a choice, which most people don't know. A lot of times we think, well, this is just the way that I am, which may be true, but it doesn't mean that you can't change it. One of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite people, Dr. Wayne Dyer, is, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that is so very true if you really think about that, because all we have is our perspective. That is what we base our decisions on, the way we interact in our relationships. And our perspective is not truth, right? If we put quotes around truth, our perspective is just the way that we see it. There are things that you can do, and I'm going to be teaching them to you today, at least a couple of them in this episode, to create a more expanded perspective, to see things maybe more accurately, but definitely more beneficially for you. So, how do we get to be the way we are with our perspective? That could be like the first question is, why do you view things the way that you do? Because if you've been following my work at all, you know that there's always a reason why. We don't just fall off the tree believing that relationships are a particular way, that finances are a particular way. We actually learn this from the people who raise us, from the community that we grow up in. There's modeled behaviors that have a really big impact on the way that we see the world and our own potential in it. So, the first thing that I'm going to talk to you about is how to take basically a perspective inventory, is what I'm calling it. And it's really looking at your beliefs. When something happens, what is your first assumption? What is the way you experience it? So much of the time, our perspective is born out of defense mechanisms that we use, psychological, like it's unconscious, obviously, to protect ourselves from pain. So if when something happens that isn't the way that you wanted it to be, if you immediately go to your perspective is, well, now it's impossible, or giving up, or becoming enraged, we all have different ways. So I'll give you some questions, and don't worry, there'll be a downloadable, basically a guide, so that you'll be able to start to get clarification about what your perspectives are now. And we'll do a little bit of sort of downloaded blueprint questions within that section as well, so that you can see where you learned these things. Because yes, I mean, when you talk about being raised a particular way, it is always nature and nurture, right? We talk about this from a therapeutic point of view, but from any point of view, meaning that we are born with particular, let's say, attributes or leanings or sensitivities. There's truth in that. So it's not so easy to just say everything about us is learned. That isn't necessarily true, because I believe that we are born particular ways. Because how do you explain children all being so very different? If you have siblings, are you exactly the same, or are some of your siblings and you very, very different? Well, that is my experience, is that we're all very different, even though we have many, many things in common, of course, because we were raised in the same family, in the same home, in the same culture. But personality-wise, you might be very different. Yes, introverts and extroverts. Some kids are just born that way. Sometimes we have bad experiences in our life that make us more introverted than we might be naturally. But when you really get down to it, there is value to both sides of nature and nurture. And with everything that I'm always wanting to teach you, the things that I know that I can teach you, I always take into consider both of those things, because there are things that we can change, right? So a lot of that is the nurture piece, which are the things we learned, the way that we were raised, the cultures we were raised in, the family norms that we grew up around. All of those things fall into the nurture category. And then there is nature. And those are things that you are just kind of, as Gaga would say, born this way, right? So we take all of that into consideration, but there are so many things that we can change and that we have the power to change about ourselves and about the way that we experience the world if the way we're experiencing it is not helping us get what we want. If we don't feel happy or fulfilled or satisfied. There's a lot of those things that we can change. So anyway, changing your perspective is one thing I know for sure that you can do. So the first thing you do is you're going to take the perspective inventory and get an idea of where you are in the spectrum. Within that inventory, we'll be talking about, are you an optimist or are you a pessimist? So why do I bring this up? Some people think that optimism and pessimism are things that we're sort of born with. I don't. I think that we can be born extroverted and or introverted, yes. But optimism, being hopeful, our ability to be hopeful, a lot of that has to do with what we learned and behaviors that we saw and behaviors that were modeled for us in our environment that we were growing up in. So with optimists, what do they say about optimists? They see a challenge or a problem and they see it as an opportunity to figure something out. A lot of times optimists are really good problem solvers because they have a hopeful perspective on the problem. I'm definitely an optimist by nature and by nurture, both. And when I have a problem in front of me, I'm in it for the long game. Like, I'm not willing, it would take so much for me to give up on something because I have evidence that if I just keep looking, if I just keep trying, if I just keep trying to figure it out, eventually I will. Now, that takes patience, but it's also, there's something not in my nature to just give up. It doesn't feel good. It isn't aligned with who I am. I feel more empowered looking at a problem and seeing an opportunity than I do looking at a problem and seeing a dead end. So a lot of times with pessimists, they will see a challenge or a problem and basically say, okay, so we can't do that. Okay, but what are we going to do instead is my question. I remember once years ago, I don't know, and this was before I had tons of therapy. I was in my 20s. And so it was almost like my optimism or my inability to stop trying to figure something out was almost to the other degree, not in the best way. And I remember my therapist saying, because I was very codependent still at that time in my life, with my sisters, with lots of friends, with a boyfriend, like there was a lot of codependency. So I looked at their problems as my own problem, and then I treated it the same way, that I wouldn't stop until it was figured out. But of course, obviously, years of therapy later, I figured out that that isn't my side of the street. That was their side of the street. And my therapist asked me some kind of a question, but the way she framed it was like, Terri, it seems that you're always kind of bailing the boat. Like, for whether it's your boat or someone else's boat, if there's water coming in, you're always the one bailing the boat. When is it time to stop bailing the boat? And I was like, never. I don't think ever. And she was like, okay, well, let's talk about that. And she helped me see this different perspective, that sometimes course correcting or changing your mind or saying, maybe this isn't possible, or maybe this isn't what I should be doing. I put all of those things in the same exact category of giving up. And to me, giving up was bad. Giving up was weakness. Giving up was something I should not do. I should keep going until I figure it out. So I share that with you because I think that for many of us, if you are still suffering from being in codependent relationships, that a lot of times you might be confused about whose boat you're bailing. Maybe right now you were like I was then, and that this is a good time to shift your perspective on that as well and get some clarity about what is yours and what isn't yours. So I think the optimist pessimist information is important information. I find after being a therapist for over 20 years, 22 years now, I think it is, that a lot of times people will go directly to the negative or directly to the problems because this is a way, or like the blocks, like, well, we can't do that because of this thing or because of that thing. And it's a way of almost feeling in control, like they're trying to anticipate what could go wrong, so they're pointing it out. If you're an optimist, like I am, when someone does that, I see that as them just being negative, or at least I used to years ago. Now I can sort of see the value rather than just having a knee-jerk reaction to someone's negativity, which I definitely would have in my 20s. I'm more able to expand my own mind and say, hey, maybe they have a point. Maybe now is not the right time to do this thing, whatever it may be, rather than just rejecting all negativism, because that's sort of like hyper positivity, right? Where it's all possible and like if you just believe enough. And I don't think that that's based in reality either. So you'll have a question or two in that first part of the guide so that you can really dial into, naturally, are you an optimist or a pessimist? Because this really does inform your perspective on things. All right, the second step that I want you to do is I want you to change your routine. I think that it's very easy to get stuck in perspective if you were very habitual by nature. And as humans, we're all somewhat habitual. But some people are habitual to the point where it's almost obsessive compulsive, where they have to eat the same food every day or they have to go the same way to work. And I find that this gets us very stuck in perspectives as well. It's like we're trying to make life, because so much of life is gray area, right? I mean, we don't know much. All the ways that we try to control things, if it's not your thoughts and your deeds, your words, those are the things you can actually control. Everything else is an illusion of control, because really we don't have control over pretty much anything else. Maybe minor children, right? Because they're in our care and we have to, I don't mean control them, but we have to take care of them and make sure they have what they need. But even in adult relationships, there are all of these ways, and codependency is one way, that we try to control the outcomes, the choices, the feeling states of other people. And yet, it's all an illusion, because you cannot control other people, but you can control yourself and get a much better handle on your mind, your thoughts, your perspective. So, the illusion of control, again, let's go back to the second point, which is when we get into this routine, again, we're trying to make things predictable, right? We want things to be the way we like them to be. Some of that is normal. Too much of that will really keep your life very small. So we don't want to have a small life. We want to have a good life, right? So change your routine, whatever that means. If every day you walk a particular way, go out of your house and go the other way, even if it's uncomfortable. I force myself when I go to my workout class. A lot of times I stand in the same place, yes. But then at least once a week, I choose to be in a totally different part of the room. And what is so funny is that every single time I do that, someone else in the room, because it's a friendly group of people, I see them all the time. Many of them I see 6 days a week in classes because that's how I work out. And they'll say, what are you doing in this neck of the woods? There'll always be some mention of me changing spots, which I think is so funny because it just speaks to how habitual we all are. And yet, if we're really looking to have a flexible perspective, to see things from different angles, we need to not be so habitual. So change your routine, get creative, do something different, eat different food, go to a different restaurant, drive a different way to work, do something different, because this is also good for your brain, because all of this habitual behavior creates these deep neural pathways in our brains. Sometimes that's great, right? This is what gives us the ability to like drive and not think about where we're going. But a lot of times it's not great, especially if what we are repeating are negative things about our lives, about our potential, about life in general. Right? We don't want to continue to do that. So changing your routine actually will help do something to your brain. It's all good. The third thing I want to say about changing your perspective, the third step, is to be super mindful of where you are comparing yourself to other people. So the compare and despair mindset, or even just compare and feel better about yourself mindset, there's something about this that is really bad for your life. The first thing is that it always makes you the center focus of everything. So if someone is talking about or showing you that they bought a new jacket and you say, oh, that's not my style, but I'm sure it'll look great on you. Why do you need to insert yourself in there? You go look at someone's house, you leave, you say to your partner, that's great for them. I don't really like that style of house. Like, why? Why does it matter what style of house you like? But we're so attached to our opinions. We're so attached to what we think, as if it elevates us in some way. And the same thing with comparing negatively, comparing where you are in your career to other people, comparing the size of your ass to someone else's, comparing the way someone looks in something. Oh, I hope I look better in that than they do, or whatever. This is such a distraction from the really good, productive work you want to do in your life, being present, being here now. So I want you to be aware of where you either compare and despair or compare and celebrate. Like, well, at least I'm not that person. Because again, these are all ways that it screws up your perspective. Because it's as if, as long as you're doing better than Betty, then everything is fine. But you're not on the same path as Betty, right? Perspective is all about from where you sit, looking at things. It also means having a healthy perspective is being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, trying to at least try. Because all of our hard-formed opinions are basically, most of the time, only from where we sit. If you're an empath, if you're a highly sensitive person, you might have more of an ability to put yourself in the other person's shoes and say, well, I understand that why they look at it this way because of their life experience, let's just say. But as a highly sensitive person or an empath, a lot of times we excuse really crappy behavior from other people because we can put ourselves in their shoes. So it's important to do it realizing you're not in their shoes, but that you can see a different perspective. It's really, really important to be able to see a different perspective and change your own perspective when we're talking about conflict. So that takes me to the fourth step, which is I'm giving you 2 exercises that you can do when you get really polarized in a situation to shift your perspective. Things that will help you see it from a different point of view. The first is when you're getting really into the nitty-gritty of something, I want you to visualize, those machines that if someone is going to the top of a tree, they get into it and it goes way, way up. It's called the cherry picker, but if you don't live in the country, you might not know what it is. Anyway, it's a machine that can take you super high up in the air. So when you're getting caught in a perspective, in a micro perspective, we'll call it, like the nitty-gritty of something you can't figure it out, I want you to take a deep breath and visualize yourself going into this cherry picker machine going all the way up. And now I want you to have a macro view of the problem, the situation, the issue, the fight that you had with someone. See if you can't see something different. If you give yourself that big perspective, like in the big scheme of things, does this really matter? Is this a fight worth having? Am I choosing my battles wisely? Or am I just so caught right now, I'm like a dog with a bone, that I can't see clearly? So I love the cherry picker, this little exercise that you can just bring yourself way up and see if I look at it from the big perspective. In the big scheme of things, does it matter? Is it worth it? Is this really what I want to do? So that's one. And the other is something that I learned at the Chopra Center like 20 years ago, where if you're having a conflict with someone, it's like you know your perspective. You've already built a case against that person. You know why you think they're messed up and they're wrong. So the exercise is to put yourself in the role of, like, let's say a New York Times reporter, where you had to get your perspective, which you already know, and you had to basically get the other person's perspective. And you don't have to ask them. I want you to imagine if a New York Times reporter or a reporter asked them what happened, how would they describe the incident, the argument, the fight? Would they describe it the same way, or would they describe it differently? Every single time I've ever used that in my life, since I learned it 2 decades ago, it's opened up my mind to the fact that maybe I wasn't seeing it so clearly as I thought I was, that there was another perspective that the other person had. And because I was mad or hurt or pissed off, it's like I only wanted to see it from my point of view. Like, they knew that, they did that to hurt me, to annoy me, like I wanted so badly to blame them and to say that they knew what they were doing. Every time I do this exercise, I end up going, okay, maybe it's possible it wasn't as deliberate as I'm making it sound. And it's very valuable to be able to change your perspective on that situation, because this is how you become an excellent problem solver. You cannot be stuck in one perspective and be really good at problem solving. So that went a little longer than I thought, but I hope that you enjoyed it. If I really want to hear it, what comes out of this for you. So please share with me, whether you listen to the podcast, or whether you watch it on YouTube, or you're looking at it on my website. Please drop me a comment, because I'm in all the many places, and I'm really interested to hear if you go through these 4 steps. They can be incredibly powerful to help you shift your perspective on things. And I want to know what you discover about yourself. So please share with me. And hey, if this added any value to your life, if you like it, if you think other people will like it, please share it on your social media platforms. The best way for you to help the Terri Cole Show, if you are a fan, is to subscribe wherever it is that you watch it, is to go to iTunes if you listen to it on the podcast, and give us a great review. We're trying to get 1,000 amazing reviews on there. I think we have a couple hundred right now. So I would love that. I would appreciate that. And yeah, right on. Just know that I appreciate the fact that you care about your mental health, because as you know, you guys are it for me. So I want to say thank you so much for spending time with me today. I hope you have an amazing rest of your week. And as always, take care of you.